to Fantasy and Faith, where Muslim storytelling meets myth and magic, weaving faith, history, and imagination into unforgettable worlds. This is episode 5 of Fantasy and Faith. Today we're looking at why most writing advice is BS. There's a lot of advice out there about what a new writer should do. Some's great, some is just plain bad. I've been writing now for over 2 decades, but I still wouldn't consider myself an expert. However, I will try and share some of my hard gained experience. So, the first piece of advice that a lot of writers get, or pretty much every writer gets, is write what you know. This is one of those pieces of advice that gets thrown out around a lot. What does it mean to write what you know? Did Tolkien know Elvish and Orc when he wrote The Lord of the Rings? Had George Lucas led tours of a galaxy far, far away? It is sensible advice, don't get me wrong, but it's also disheartening. So let's try and understand it a little bit better. You know a lot of things. You know how to be you. You know your family. You know your friends. You know what it is like to go to school. You may even know what it's like to have a job. You have experienced joyous moments in your life, and you may have also experienced tragic moments. All of these are fuel for your writing. Then there are your hobbies and special interests. All those hours of sitting in front of a television watching Netflix, all those movies, video games, and books that you have poured a chunk of your life into, all that can feed into your stories and characters. For me, this advice is about starting with what you know and then add to your knowledge. As Brandon Sanderson says, you have literal libraries of knowledge available to you through the magic of technology. You can become an expert enough in a subject to write confidently about it. You don't have to have a PhD or a master's in a topic in order to generate a believable illusion for your reader to accept the reality you have painted. So, write what you know is really a speculative leap from what you know well enough to the convincing enough illusion of what is believable. The next piece of advice that you commonly hear is read lots. Lots and lots and lots. Not bad advice at all, really. As a new writer, you are likely going to mimic the style and tone of your favorite author. Anyone who has read my work will be able to identify my influences from my writing. It's taken a long time for me to develop my own voice, but I'm probably still influenced by what I have enjoyed reading, playing, and watching. One antidote for writing too much like your writing heroes is to read more widely. Read more authors and genres. I read the Twilight series, even though I'm not its primary audience, and not into gothic romances. I've also read Virginia Andrews, Daniel Steele, Sidney Sheldon, and others. I even tried to read some westerns, but perhaps I didn't find the right writer. Someone who doesn't read will struggle to understand the conventions of writing, the tropes of their chosen genre, and importantly, what has already been written. The third piece of advice is write lots. And again, great advice. Sometimes a person comes along and the first thing they write is accepted by an agent or a publisher, and they go on to become bestsellers. I can't name you a single person like that, but there probably is one out there. Most writers spend years perfecting their craft before ever getting published. The more you write, the better you get. Why do you think I write blogs? One of Brandon Sanderson's key pieces of advice to new writers is that you've got to write 6 books to learn your craft before you should even try to get published. Traditionally, I didn't know this before and wondered why my first 2 books didn't land a traditional publisher. Had I known this, maybe I wouldn't have taken a long hiatus from writing, disappointed with my crumbling dreams of becoming a best selling author. Now I have 3 books planned to drop over the next couple of years, none of which are going to cross a traditional publisher or agent's desk. Read books on writing. That's the next piece of advice. I still do. Here are some of my recommended books to read. Stephen King's On Writing is not your straightforward manual on how to be a best-selling writer. It's more kind of a memoir of writing, but there's so much great advice in there that I recommend it to everybody. Everybody who wants to be a writer should read Stephen King's On Writing. Then there's Brian McDonald, The Golden Theme, How to Make Your Writing Appeal to the Highest Common Denominator. He's got a couple of books actually that are worth reading. That I think the other one's called The Invisible Ink. Orson Scott Card, again, I don't agree with this guy's politics, but he is a fantastic writer, and he's written a book called How to Write Science Fiction and Fantasy, which I recommend. Robert McKee's story is another one. It's more about script writing, but there's so many lessons in there for pretty much every writer that I would recommend reading that too. And then finally, although I say finally, I don't mean that as in you don't need to read any more on writing after that, but I highly recommend you get a copy of Strunk and White's The Elements of Style. It will teach you a lot about what strong writing is. It might not be the most flowery and beautiful prose you have written, but the elements of style will help you write more direct, efficient, and to the point. Another piece of advice that writers often give is to write every day. Again, it's a great piece of advice, but not always doable. I suggest setting yourself some time that you can write every week and then sticking to it. Not everyone can come home after work and knock out 1,000 words. Set yourself a goal though, and try and achieve it on a weekly basis. Somewhere between 200 and 1,000 words a day is a good goal to start off with, but it will vary depending on your capacity and ability to generate writing. So try and write a minimum of 1,400 words to 7,000 words a week. Don't worry too much about the quality of the writing. First draft is all about getting words on paper, and then you can sort out all the problems in your second and third draft. How to deal with writer's block is something that we all have to grapple with at some point. You have some writers who claim that, oh, I've never had writer's block, I just sit down and write and just flows. There'll be other writers who spent years and years, maybe even decades, struggling with writer's block. The easy answer is to work on something else, either another part of the same project or go work on something else. Just make sure you're right. The hard answer is that sometimes you just have to step away from it and go do something else. Inspiration normally comes when you are doing the dishes, sitting on the toilet, taking a walk, or in my case, driving home from work. Now my commute's a lot shorter, it's a lot harder to come up with great ideas in 15 minutes. If it doesn't come, then work on something else for a while. One problem we all have at the moment is that we don't like to be unoccupied. That's why our smartphones are always in our hands. So we have to overcome that problem of um, needing to be occupied all the time. Sometimes just sitting there and letting your brain wander around in your thoughts is a useful way of generating new ideas. Grappling with sentences, words, and ideas when you're struggling to write is also what makes writing worthwhile. Some of the best stuff comes from that feeling of verbal constipation. Next piece of advice is develop a thick skin. Not everybody is going to like your writing. Every writer, other than the mythical one I mentioned earlier, that just writes something and is awesome and it gets uh, published straight away and becomes a bestseller overnight. Every other writer has a pile of huge rejections that have built up over the years. Famously, Stephen King has a railway spike stacked with rejection notes. So find a writing group, or join critters to help you get feedback on your writing. It's really important, especially when you start off writing, to get this kind of critical advice from other writers. It's so important, especially at the early stages of your writing life, to have those critical friends um, to give you the best advice. However, don't expect impartial and unbiased feedback from family and friends. Yes, they can give you some feedback, but they will either be too nice or too evil. I'm talking about my brothers here. They will rip you apart. So that's where developer thick skin comes from. Is get ready for criticism, get ready for people to be brutally honest, but always take it with a pinch of salt. Some people will try to rewrite your stories to match their own idea of what the story should be. Some people will be overly critical just for the sake of knocking you down a peg. So take it with a pinch of salt. Don't always listen to the advice you're being given by other writers and readers. Consider yourself where you want your story to hit. Another, and probably the last piece of advice, is do a creative writing course. I mean, it can't hurt, right? I did a creative writing course as part of my degree. It was the minor pathway. It was BA English studies with media studies and creative writing. So I had weekly creative writing workshops that I attended. It probably made me a better writer because I was writing regularly and trying out different stuff, but not to the point that it made me more publishable. So if you don't want to go to university, and even if you have been to university, I highly recommend watching Brandon Sanderson's lecture series on writing fantasy. It's available on YouTube. Just search Brandon Sanderson lectures and you will hopefully find it. He's done one every 5 years. So I think the most recent one, it was 2025. He recorded them earlier this year. He's taking lectures on different aspects of writing fantasy fiction. I've seen it twice now and I found it very useful. He's also got a web page full of writing advice as well. www.brandonsanderson.com / pages / writing advice full stop. I occasionally will blog post on advice on how to be a better writer. So there's also that. So if you want to have a look at my website, www.trollking.com, that will also have some good advice for new writers. I've been blogging now for, I'd say, about 20 years now. So over the years, I've accumulated quite a lot of blog posts on how to write. So definitely check that out too. That is it for this episode of Fantasy and Faith. Thank you for joining me. And until next time, keep dreaming, keep writing, and let your story shine.